Hey guys, welcome back to the Casual NBA Fanatic podcast. Now, in today's week, we're just going to be deep diving into a quick reel that I released last week, which was about the top 5 power forwards of all time. So basically, just going through that illustrious top 5 zone, who we did cut out, and how we actually ranked the top 5. I actually think how I selected them was pretty easy. And just to recap, that 5 list went as follows. So we had Charles Barkley at number 5. We had Dirk Nowitzki at number 4. Giannis Antetokounmpo at number 3. Number 2, we had Kevin Garnett. And at number 1, obviously here, we had Tim Duncan. And so with this list in particular, I did have to jog through my brain and actually decipher who I wanted specifically in every spot besides obviously Tim Duncan, who to me, in terms of the greatness and dominance, stands alone at the number 1 position on this list. But just the other guys here, the other 4 guys laying here were extremely hard. And I think just to run through, because they all have so many different variables in their careers that do deprive them in these all-time discussions. They all have little things that do lay as asterisks on their careers and legacies. So with Charles Barkley, it's the fact that he is ringless at the end of the day. Dirk Nowitzki, multiple brutal playoff losses in his actual prime. And also just the defensive drawbacks and impacts that you are getting from him compared to the other guys on this list. For Giannis, it's the lack of offensive diversity for the greater portion of those prime years. And also just the relatively paved finals run that he had, with the injuries that we saw to all the major threats against that Bucks team in 2021. We're talking about injuries to the Lakers, the Clippers, and the Brooklyn Nets. 3 teams that arguably all had equal to better chances of winning the title if they were healthy. And then for Kevin Garnett, it's the fact that he won his title in Boston for a super team. And he also didn't even get the labeled finals MVP either. Despite being the best player on that team, he just didn't get the actual end accolade at the end of the day. And those are the small asterisks on them. Not that really defines their careers or should define their careers by any means. But that is why Tim Duncan does separate himself there. And those 4 guys, because of those small little variables, they all have things that make them hard to rank between them, themselves. And so the main 3, though, between the guys that were hard to rank were that 2 to 4 stint between Dirk, Giannis, and KG. And that became the hardest to rank. I think they're all pretty comfortably above Charles Barkley in this all-time rank, both from an individual standpoint and then also from a legacy standpoint. They all have rings, either finals MVPs or just part of championship teams in the past. And just with the way I went with it, to me, as individual basketball talents at their specific positions and what their specific positions are called for, especially these are some guys that played obviously the power forward position, but they deviated to the center positions, had to anchor both ends of the floor as well. So from that talent perspective, I just think KJ and Giannis just provided more stability and more proven playoff resilience in terms of the value you are getting from their individual packages as two-way megastars in this league. And with Giannis, though he wasn't really a sole defensive anchor in his prime, obviously the Bucks brought in Brook Lopez, who was one of the best defenders on the planet. Obviously, though, he wasn't that sole defensive captain. He provided that Dirk-level transcendent skill set with the undeniable rim pressure impact and just the freak work that he could do on the margins as an athletic freak. I take that rim pressure value over what Dirk could do as a spacer and as a wicked contested jump shooter. And then for KG's case in this talent discussion, out of the 3, he was the most talented defender in the world. And he's probably the most talented defender of all time to me. And legit, in terms of today's terms, think about a combination of Bam Adebayo and Evan Mobley in terms of just the frame, the switchable athleticism. And then when we're talking about the cognitive instincts, think about a Draymond Green, Chet Holmgren type of vibe. When he did come to Boston, KG, the vocal leadership, the communication, being able to keep his point of attack guys informed continuously in coverages, and then matching that with the all-around frame that you're getting, strong. You gain the footwork, you gain the lateral speed, you gain the length, the strides, the high-intensity motor, the high-level vertical presence. This guy was probably, to me, he's the most talented defender to ever grace this game. And from that talent perspective, that feeds a lot into that. And then offensively as well, he might be getting the most talented and diversified big for his time. terms of the multiple ways he could create and contribute to offense. High quality score on the block, really high quality in face-ups, starting from the elbows, making feeds out of the post, running dribble handoffs, dumping off to cutters. And like his speed and the agile frame that he brought at that power forward center position as a ball handler just naturally gave him more passing windows than guys like Dirk Nowitzki did in his time. And that just made him a more diversified offensive anchor as well to me. And so not to say Dirk was a bad playoff performer either, because I'm saying KG and Giannis had more playoff resilient skill sets. Not to say Dirk was a bad playoff performer, because that is far from true. This is one of the most dominant offensive forces we've ever seen enter the playoffs. But I just preferred the playoff value that you are getting from both KG and Giannis more so. And that did lead my argument here. And, you know, and then also you're getting into the accolades as well. Like it's pretty much dead even across the three, but I would give KG and Giannis's resumes a bit more touch of respect in that regard. And this is where, for me, that's where KG and Giannis do get a small little leg up in this conversation too. Obviously, look at KG's resume. It is so decorated. Like, it is very hard to compete with any talent in NBA history. We're talking about 15 All-Star appearances, 9 All-NBA selections, 12 All-Defense selections, a Defensive Player of the Year, 4 rebounding titles, and a champion and MVP, and a guy who no doubt was the best and the most impactful player on his championship squad. And so that's also where like the no finals MVP on KG's resume doesn't hold any weight to me. And if it wasn't for KG's injury in 2009, he may have had 2 titles and finally get that coveted finals MVP on his resume anyways. So in terms of what he did achieve in this league, I thought Kevin Garnett also just resume-wise, accolade-wise, does topple over both of these guys for now. And where Giannis also does right as well is where he does replicate much of that variety of the resume too, like Kevin Garnett. Obviously, Dirk misses out on a lot of the defensive and athleticism oriented like stuff. Like there's no rebounding, there's no block titles, there's no defense like accolades at all in there. And then also just the longevity though to Giannis, that's the only thing that differentiates him and Kevin Garnett. And I think he just still needs to carve a little bit more into that longevity stuff before he can reach that KG status. And then like with the skill sets as well, like as talents, KG's talent to me, this is between KG and Giannis right now. KG's talent was just much harder to expose because he had more variety of impact in his game, if that makes sense. And obviously, though, Giannis' ceiling probably reached higher heights, especially we're talking about a guy who in his finals run, he averaged 35, 13, 5 assists, and 3 stocks on 63% effective field goal percentage. So the ceiling, I would lean Giannis in that lone final series especially, but the longevity piece for Giannis is just the last thing he has to claim in this battle between these other 2 guys. And with how he's fully retooled this offensive game as well, you know, becoming a more patient, surgical, being more mature with that mindset, I probably will have Giannis ahead of KG within the next year or 2, to be honest, depending on how his circumstances shift. Maybe he moves the team, gets into another competitive scenario. We might be able to see him healthy in more postseasons now. So the longevity piece, I've got to see it a bit more with him. But the accolades and individual talent for me, I prefer KG. Giannis gets a leg up in the individual conversations. He also just had a more decorated resume as of now compared to what Dirk had. So that's how I differentiate between these 3. And then dropping downward to my ranking at number 5, I had Charles Barkley here. And I think a lot of people may have, like, this is probably the most disliked aspect of my list. And it's because of the fact that I had to cut Karl Malone to put Barkley on this list. Now, before I get into things with Karl Malone, let's not forget just how good prime Charles Barkley was. We're talking about a guy with 11 All-NBA selections, and that alone ranks ahead of both Giannis and Kevin Garnett in totality. We're talking about one of the most dominant MVP campaigns that we've ever seen from a team and individual value standpoint, with that Phoenix squad that desperately needed Charles Barkley's arrival to reach those heights that they needed to threaten the Jordan's reign in that 3-peat, the first 3-peat for Jordan. And then also Barkley in that final series probably posed as the biggest threat that Jordan's ever had to go up against in any final series. And like, this was an unstoppable train wreck of a man. Someone who wasn't the biggest or the strongest, but he just had the outright speed advantage for his position in his time. And he had that against any big. And he paired that with an uncanny ability to be able to thrust and distribute his weight with that power to a degree that just made him so exceptionally hard to deny as a downhill force. And like both in the, like obviously in the half court, he was tremendous, but we're talking about one of the most prolific transition players that we've ever seen. And so he was like just being also like as a talent as well. Like when we are in this all-time landscape, like we said with KG, we respect the diversity of talent relative to your era. This guy's one of the best spacing bigs all time relative to his era. Like we talk about deep mid-range face-up game, which was such a major staple in his scoring like arsenal. And he had that down pat for years, especially when he got to Phoenix. So my God, that could shoot the three to a degree for his time as well. And we're talking about one of the strongest passers at that time for his position. And overall as well, like, I mean, Barkley's peak in 1993 when we are like actually going against ceiling to ceiling, and like even in those years prior, like when he was in Philadelphia as well, he was placing routinely in the top 5 for MVP discussions for mostly mediocre basketball teams. And like Barkley's time in the NBA, yes, he didn't end up getting that ring, and like he's joined teams like Phoenix who were really good before he got there. I think they won 52, 53 games before he got there. He joined the Rockets, tried to get that little super team type of thing going with Scottie and Hakeem. Didn't work out yet. So yes, he didn't get the ring, but he actually did so much in this league. And so I just hope people didn't actually forget what an offensive powerhouse of impact Charles Barkley actually was in his prime. And when we are talking about individual talent, to be honest with you, I would probably lean towards Charles Barkley than Karl Malone because I respect the portability of that skill set that he did bring to the game. They are also both ringless too. But for the Karl Malone debate, now obviously you have the off-court issues. Obviously I'm going to state that. And that no doubt did plague the overall perception of Karl for me and for the entire NBA community as expected. But quite literally, this is one of the GOATs of longevity that we've ever seen. So I'm going to guard the one an MVP at age 35. Now, obviously that was the lockout year, but this guy legit captained back-to-back finals runs at age 33 and age 34. He was still a top 10 scorer in the NBA at age 38. And so this is stuff that like really only LeBron has and Kevin Durant, when KD gets to this age, may be able to touch. But his prime to me just wasn't ever as dominant or impactful as Charles Barkley's was. And that's why I always preferred Barkley's overall game as an offensive tank. And it does become hard making the case, obviously considering his overall reputation in the league, for Karl Malone. Like that's where he also does lose a bit of ground, I will be honest. And it is unfair to a degree when we are judging based off pure basketball talent and achievements. But that reputation and legacy is very, very tainted at this point in time. At number 1 though, just to state why Tim Duncan is the greatest power forward of all time, which I think everyone kind of knows. Whether or not people have like a deep analysis or like a big argument backed in their brain to be able to bring up in NBA discussions. But just to give a quick one for me, like I think it's pretty obvious why Tim Duncan is here. I think it's pretty uncontested at the number 1 position. And so now, like for Duncan as well, like one thing I want to get clear, because you might have a few guys pointing at why he even lands on this list, because he actually played majority of his time at the center position throughout his career. But Duncan's prime was at the power forward position, so that's why I did put him here. And if I would have put him at a center as well, though, on my top 5 centers list, I would have had to have cut some guys in that center list, which would have made these discussions just much more complicated. So we did go with Duncan as a power forward here, and the competition in terms of like for his resume and his stand as someone that was the best player in the NBA for multiple years, that makes him so just untouched on this list. I think the only other players on this list that could have said they were the best player in the world for any period of time would have been KG in 2004, maybe, or Giannis between that, 2021 to 2022-3 reign before Jokic took the title. And when we're talking about Duncan and we're talking about greatness, we're talking about literally one of the greatest franchise cornerstones in the history of sports. Like legit, unbelievable success within a 19-year span, all with the same franchise. In Duncan's first 8 years in the league, 8 whole years, that's nearly a decade of NBA basketball, Duncan was a top 5 MVP candidate, and he had a 4-year stretch where he either finished first or second in the MVP ranking. So that's like the type of Jokic type of prime that we've seen as well. He won 5 championships in total through 6 finals appearances, so he just barely lost when he got to those finals. And he has the all-time record for all defense selections at 15 years, being selected as one of the top defensive anchors in basketball. And he pairs that with 15 All-NBA selections as well. And so, to me, Tim Duncan is he's the most dominant traditional anchor that we've seen in the 21st century, and it's not close. Maybe even all time when you do consider the value for a franchise to have a guy with that much longevity of impact. And he's probably, to me, like I made this argument with Anthony Davis in the summer. Like AD is the most balanced two-way player in the league. I think it's Wemby now. But to me, Tim Duncan is the most balanced two-way player, two-way superstar in the history of this league. And that weights a lot for me when you are talking about your value that you bring on both ends of the floor. And we're just talking about a stout rim protector, 7'5" wingspan, an oak tree type of like strength at his base and his core as well, to be able to absorb driving and post contact and still be able to keep that vertical presence up top. And before Jokic came along, this was the most sustainable post-up fulcrum the game has ever seen. Just with that insane soft touch that he had, just fundamental but traditional but super effective footwork on the block. Someone that brought stable strength, but most importantly, methodical awareness in an era where playoff defenses relentlessly suffocated the post. And so when I'm making this top 5 power forwards list, I don't think Tim Duncan has any right to be contested by anyone else on this list. And so that's how my top 5 power forwards ran. I don't think any of the other honorable mentions really probably like hold much weight in this conversation. So if you want to count honorable mentions, I had Karl Malone at number 6, Charles Barkley at 5, number 4, I went with Dirk, number 3, Giannis, slowly creeping up. I think he'll get to that second spot soon, but right now, number 2 is Kevin Garnett, and number 1, again, uncontested, Tim Duncan. Now, I have come out with my all-time centers list already. I've already listed my 5 guys out. You could probably find that on the Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, wherever you might find my videos for say. But I will be coming out with that little breakdown maybe next week. I like doing these short little deep dives. They are pretty fun. I do talk pretty fast as well, so I can get a lot of information out there as well. So it's good to have these like short little bursts of episodes. And honestly, I'll come out with that at some point next week. We might do something over Christmas to do with the NBA games, the NBA slate as well. So I'll catch you guys in the next one. I appreciate you guys for listening and have a Merry Christmas.